For 171 years, it was a crime, a hanging offense, to write your own name. Not to commit treason. Not to raise arms against the crown. Just to sign a piece of paper as who you actually were. From 1603 to 1774, the surname MacGregor was illegal in Scotland. Say it in the wrong company, and you could lose your land, your weapons, your life. Entire families spent 7 generations answering to names that weren't theirs: Murray, Grant, Campbell, Black, because the one their fathers gave them had been struck from the record by royal decree. That's one name. There are 9 more like it, each tied to a specific clan, a specific glen, a history someone in power tried very hard to make disappear. If your surname is on this list, this is where you come from, and this is what it costs to keep the name. We start at 10. Armstrong doesn't come from Gaelic at all. It's plain English, first recorded in the Scottish borders, and it means exactly what it sounds like: a man with a strong arm. Legend has it the name was earned on a battlefield, hauling a fallen king back onto his horse by main strength. No record confirms that story, but the family it produced needed no legend to be terrifying. By the 1500s, the Armstrongs were the single most feared name on the border. Reivers, raiders, a clan that could reportedly put 3,000 riders in the saddle and answered to no crown on either side of the line. Their most dramatic episode, in 1530, King James V invited the Armstrong chief, Johnny of Gilnockie, to a parley under a promise of safe conduct. Then hanged him and his men on the spot without trial. It was betrayal dressed as diplomacy, and the borders never fully forgave the crown for it. Their glen was Liddesdale. Their seat, Gilnockie Tower, still stands. After 1603, when the union of the crowns finally ended the border wars, the Armstrongs were rounded up and deported en masse to Ulster in Fermanagh. The crown didn't erase the name, it just tried to move it somewhere it couldn't cause trouble. From Ulster, generation by generation, Armstrongs crossed to Pennsylvania and pushed on into Appalachia, which is exactly the route Neil Armstrong's own ancestors took. On March 11, 1972, the first man on the moon stood on top of Gilnockie Tower as the newly named Freeman of Langholm, and told the crowd it was the hardest place in the world to be recognized. His own hometown. Douglas is Gaelic at its root. Douglas, Black Stream, a name taken from a river in Lanarkshire, long before it belonged to a family that would become the second most powerful in Scotland, after the crown itself. Their defining episode is one of the great images in Scottish history. In 1329, on his deathbed, Robert the Bruce asked his most trusted knight, Sir James Douglas, to carry his heart to Jerusalem, a crusade Bruce himself had always wanted and never made. Douglas set out in 1330, with the embalmed heart in a silver casket on a chain around his neck. He never reached Jerusalem. Diverted into a crusade against the Moors in Spain, he was killed at the Battle of Teba, the heart recovered from the battlefield and carried home to be buried at Melrose Abbey. From that day, the Douglas coat of arms carries a crowned heart, earned, not decorative. The family that followed, the Black Douglases, grew so powerful from their base in the southern uplands that by the 1400s, Scottish kings feared them more than they feared England, and eventually broke the earldom by force to survive them. Douglas emigration wasn't one dramatic expulsion. It was the long, steady lowland Scots migration of the 1700s and 1800s to the Carolinas, to Canada's Maritimes, following trade and land rather than fleeing a single massacre. It's one of the most common Scottish surnames in North America today, for exactly that reason. It left on its own terms. Murray comes from Moray, the old northern province, and marks a family that governed one of the largest and most strategically important territories in the Highlands, Atholl. Here's the fact that still holds up today. The Atholl Highlanders, the private regiment of the Duke of Atholl, chief of Clan Murray, are Europe's only legal private army. The regiment traces back to 1777, was revived as a ceremonial bodyguard in 1839, and in 1844 Queen Victoria, so charmed by her reception at Blair Castle, personally granted the Duke the right to keep it under arms. It still parades at Blair Castle every year, under its own colours, answerable to the Duke, not the British Army. Their seat is Blair Castle itself, in Athol, Perthshire, the whitewashed fortress still standing at the heart of Murray territory. Unlike the border clans, the Murrays weren't proscribed or banished. Their diaspora was administrative and mercantile, Murrays moving into law, the church, and colonial government across the 1700s and 1800s, which is why the name shows up so heavily among the professional and landowning classes of the early United States and Canada, from Georgia to Nova Scotia. Cameron likely derives from the Gaelic cam strawn, crooked nose, an unglamorous origin for a clan that produced one of the most devastating losses of the Jacobite era. Their most dramatic episode is Culloden itself, April 16, 1746. The Camerons of Lochaber fought in the front line under their chief Donald Cameron of Lochiel, Gentle Lochiel, who was carried wounded from the field in both legs. He escaped into the mountains and eventually fled to France, dying there less than 2 years later, never to see his home again. That home was Achnacarry, seat of the Camerons in Lochaber. On May 28, 1746, government troops under Bligh's regiment burned the great timber house of Achnacarry to the ground as reprisal. The clan's land confiscated, along with dozens of others after the rising. It stood in ruins for over half a century, before a later chief paid a crown fine to reclaim the estate in 1802 and rebuild. That confiscation is the diaspora story for Cameron, and for the whole Jacobite Highlands. Dispossession first, emigration after. Camerons scattering through the later 1700s to the Carolinas and to Glengarry County in Ontario, a piece of Lochaber rebuilt in Canadian soil. No name on this list carries more weight, because Stewart isn't just a clan name. It became a royal house. The name comes from an office, not a bloodline. The High Steward of Scotland, first granted around 1150 to Walter Fitzalan, a Breton whose family had settled in Britain after the Norman conquest. Stewart, keeper of the household, became Stewart, and the office was made hereditary within a few generations. The turn that changed everything. A Stewart High Steward married Marjorie Bruce, daughter of Robert the Bruce. Their son became King Robert II in 1371, and from that marriage, the Stewarts governed Scotland, then England, Ireland, and Great Britain, until 1714. Every Stuart monarch you've heard of, Mary, James, Charles, spelled the name the French way, but it's the same Highland stewardship that started it. Because the name became attached to the crown itself, ordinary Stuart families scattered across the Highlands and Lowlands both, Athol, Oppen, Balwhidder, with no single glen to call their own, and, after the fall of the House of Stewart in 1714, no royal favour to protect them either. Stuarts emigrated in enormous numbers throughout the 1700s, one of the most widely spread Scottish surnames in the United States today, from Virginia to the Carolinas to the Ozarks. Before we go further, the name at number 1 was banned so completely that for over a century and a half, saying it out loud could get you killed. We're building to it. Here's the irony this list exists to surface. Wallace, the surname of Scotland's most famous national hero, doesn't mean Scot. It means the opposite. It comes from the Old French and Anglo-Norman Wallace, Welshman or foreigner, a label for the Brittonic-speaking Britons of the Old Kingdom of Strathclyde, cousins of the Welsh, who'd survived in western Scotland long after Gaelic and Scots had taken over everywhere else. Which means William Wallace, the man who led Scotland's resistance against English occupation in the 1290s, the man behind the legend Braveheart simplified beyond recognition, carried a surname that literally marked his family as outsiders in their own country. Generations before, he became its symbol. Wallace's own story needs no invention. Victory at Stirling Bridge in 1297, defeat at Falkirk in 1298, and execution in London in 1305. Hanged, drawn, and quartered, his head displayed on London Bridge. Where legend and record differ is in the details, Hollywood added. The execution and the resistance are documented fact. The Wallace name spread through ordinary lowland emigration, rather than any single expulsion, into the Carolinas and Virginia through the 1700s, carried less by clan structure than by the same pull of land and opportunity that moved most lowland Scots west. Fraser likely comes from the Norman French fraise, strawberry flower, a heraldic pun that shows up on the clan's crest to this day. Norman in origin, thoroughly Highland by adoption, within a few generations of arriving in Scotland. Their most dramatic episode belongs to one man, Simon Fraser, 11th Lord Lovat, a double-dealing, endlessly ambitious chief who backed the Jacobite Rising of 1745 while quietly hedging his bets with the crown, and lost the gamble completely. Captured after Culloden, tried for treason in London, he was beheaded on Tower Hill on April 9, 1747, at roughly 80 years old, the last man in Britain ever executed by beheading. An overcrowded viewing stand collapsed during the execution, killing several spectators, which Lovat reportedly found darkly funny from the scaffold. Their territory was Oired and Stratheric, around Loch Ness, with Beaufort as their seat. Highland Fraser country, distinct from the lowland Frasers who'd never left the borders. If the name feels newly familiar, that's not a coincidence. Diana Gabaldon named her Outlander hero, Jamie Fraser, deliberately, tying her fictional family to Lovat's real one. And the show has sent more American tourists to Fraser country than any documentary ever has. Post-Culloden, Fraser lands were forfeited like the Camerons, and the clan emigrated hard through the later 1700s, many enlisting in Fraser Highlander regiments that fought in North America and simply stayed, which is why Fraser and its variant Fraser run thick through the Carolinas and eastern Canada today. MacDonald means exactly what it says, son of Donald, but the family behind it was, for centuries, the single most powerful in the Hebrides, the Lords of the Isles, who ruled a semi-independent maritime kingdom off Scotland's west coast and treated the Scottish crown as, at best, an equal. Their most dramatic episode isn't a battle, it's a betrayal. On February 13, 1692, at Glencoe, a company of soldiers under Captain Robert Campbell of Glenlyon had spent 12 days quartered with the MacDonalds under the ancient Highland law of hospitality. Then, acting on orders to put all to the sword under 70, they turned on their hosts in the night. 38 MacDonalds were killed outright, including the clan chief, and more died fleeing into the snow. It's remembered in Scotland, not just as a massacre, but specifically as murder under trust. A violation of hospitality itself, which is precisely why it still stings 3 centuries later. Their territory ran across Skye, the Isles, and Glencoe itself, with Armadale among their seats. The lordship of the Isles was formally broken by the Crown in 1493, and that slow dismantling, followed by Culloden 60 years after Glencoe, pushed MacDonalds into some of the earliest and heaviest Highland emigration to North America, especially to the Carolinas and Cape Fear Valley, in the 1730s through 1770s, and later to Prince Edward Island and Nova Scotia. It remains one of the most common surnames of Scottish descent in the United States today. Campbell, from the Gaelic com beul, crooked mouth, built the single most successful clan machine in Highland history. From a base at Loch Awe, the Campbells allied early and consistently with the Crown and grew richer and more powerful for it, generation after generation, while their rivals fought and lost. That same alliance is what makes Campbell inseparable from the story you just heard. It was Campbell of Glenlyon's soldiers who carried out the killing at Glencoe. Not out of clan feud alone, but on direct government orders, with the Campbell chief, the Earl of Argyll, positioned to benefit from the MacDonalds' fall. The resentment outlasted everyone involved. To this day, The Clochig Inn in Glencoe keeps a sign at its door reading "No Hawkers or Campbells," half tourist joke, half 300-year-old grudge that Scotland has simply decided to keep. Their seat, Inverera Castle on Loch Fyne, remains the clan's home to this day, still held by the Duke of Argyll, which makes Campbell nearly unique on this list, a clan whose story is one of power kept, not power lost. Their emigration was less about expulsion and more about ambition. Campbell's moving into colonial administration, trade, and land speculation across the American South and Canadian Maritimes through the 1700s and 1800s. And here is where we started. MacGregor, son of Gregor, one of the oldest clan names in the Highlands, claiming descent from an 11th century king, and one of the only names in British history the state tried to erase by law. The trigger was the Battle of Glenfruin in February 1603, a MacGregor victory, so bloody and so embarrassing to the crown, that King James VI responded not with a battle, but with a decree. The name MacGregor was abolished. Bearing it, in speech or in writing, became a capital offense. Clan members couldn't own land, couldn't carry weapons, couldn't gather in groups larger than 4. It was lifted briefly under Charles II in 1661, then reimposed under William of Orange in 1693. In total, the ban held on and off for 171 years until 1774. For that entire span, MacGregor survived by disappearing into other names, Murray, Grant, Drummond, Campbell among them, earning the clan its haunting nickname, Children of the Mist. A people who existed, but, on paper, officially did not. Their most famous son carried the outlawed name anyway, Rob Roy MacGregor, cattleman, outlaw, and folk hero through the early 1700s, operating in the glens around Loch Katrine and Balwhidder, while the ban was still, technically, the law of the land. Where legend has turned him into a Highland Robin Hood, and the record shows a more complicated cattle trader, an occasional blackmailer, both agree on this. He never stopped calling himself a MacGregor, law or no law. Because the name itself was suppressed for so long, MacGregor's American diaspora is scattered rather than concentrated. Descendants often carrying the adopted surnames their ancestors were forced into instead, which means if your family history runs through a Murray, a Grant, or a Campbell, with no clear paper trail before the 1770s, the name underneath might quietly be this one. 10 names, 10 glens, a hanging, a beheading, a massacre, and a century and a half spent illegal, simply for existing. And that's only 10. Scotland has hundreds of clan histories just as sharp, just as documented, just as close to the surface if you know where to dig. So tell us where you come from. Drop your surname in the comments. We research every single one, and whichever name gets requested the most becomes its own full episode. And if you want to trace your own line further than we can go in 15 minutes, there are some genuinely good research tools linked below. This has been The Old Country. Next time, Ireland. 10 surnames that descend in a straight documented line from kings.